Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. We are Baltimore positive. We are positively getting into a divisional weekend. We only get 7 football games left here. We've had an ownership press conference in Baltimore this week. We have had breaking news on the WNST Baltimore Positive Text Service brought to you by Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy. And, I didn't really think John was going to take the Atlanta job or the Nashville job. I thought the Packers thing was intriguing. I thought if the Browns offered him ownership and gave him a piece of the stadium, that, a couple of these franchises that were out there, Luke, they had more than just a football job. And John doesn't aspire to that. John doesn't want Ozzy's job. John doesn't want to be John's a ball coach, right? So like this Giants opportunity, and I'm wearing my Raskin Global New York Giants green over top of the Tennessee Titan. I'm just trying to stay warm. It's cold as hell. You're wearing your Pizza John's hat. And my wife's like, I want pizza this week. And I'm like, not on Monday. John Harbaugh, 100 million bucks. He'll run off and, bum, bum, na, 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 start spreading the news. He's a giant. How about that, huh?
Yeah, giant opportunity for John Harbaugh. I mean, let the puns begin. What, the New York Post and all the clever headline writers in New York City. But after about the first 24 to 48 hours following Harbaugh's dismissal from the Ravens, it kind of felt like the Giants were the leader in the clubhouse all along. I know the likes of Ian O'Connor were following that and tweeting about it a lot and seemed to be very plugged in terms of the Giants' pursuit of Harbaugh. And as we've kind of pointed out, and look, my immediate reaction to John Harbaugh being fired in terms of what would happen for him, I joked about the Cleveland Browns. I mentioned that the Cleveland Browns were his favorite team growing up, but there's not a whole lot of appeal other than if you were a Browns fan growing up to go coach the Cleveland Browns. They don't have a quarterback. And that was kind of the common theme of all these other jobs. I mean, even Pittsburgh, and I know you talked about how good the Steelers' job is. They don't have a quarterback, and they're an older roster, right? I mean, of all these teams, and as we pointed out, unless you're talking about a team like the Ravens, where it's very unique that a job like that becomes available with a franchise quarterback who is still somewhere in his prime, whether you think it's the middle of it, the latter portion of it, whatever. He's 29 years old. Uh, most of these jobs have warts. Most of these jobs come open because teams are not successful. I mean, even the Ravens, because they were 8-9, even if that's not typically the kind of record that you think of that gets a head coach fired, for the Ravens, it was. So you look at this and you look at what would be appealing to John Harbaugh in terms of, yes, money and perks and flexibility and financial wherewithal to hire a good staff and all those things that are going to be important anywhere. But you did look at the fact that the Giants have a young quarterback. They have a young quarterback in Jackson Dart who showed some flashes and some impressive things in his rookie year. Now, I'll point out after years of you and I sparring over the idea of Lamar Jackson, quote, running into linebackers, Jackson Dart did way too much of that as a rookie. Like, genuinely, if you watched him play, had a concussion, was constantly checked for concussions, but he's talented. And I
But
think,
by the way, I used to say Lamar runs into linebacker. Lamar avoids linebackers. They run into him,
sure,
which
no,
scared
I mean,
me. This
and I
guy
said it
runs
in
into
jest.
linebackers. So, like, that's a different,
I mean,
really,
this guy
yeah.
needs to slide. He needs to run out of bounds. We saw the Thursday night game against the Patriots where he got completely lit up. And that was what? I think that was right after he'd come back from a concussion. But Jackson Dart's talented. And I think if you're John Harbaugh and you looked at the teams that were linked to him, being linked to him in the strongest fashion, it was the Giants. It was Atlanta, which there are options there. I mean, Michael Penix, they drafted in the top 10 and it was a first round pick. But it's coming off of another knee injury, going back to multiple knee injuries, going back to his college days. And Kirk Cousins, which, not saying the Falcons can't win games with Kirk Cousins, but there's very clearly a ceiling there. And the Titans, even if you love Cam Ward, is there as much around him? At least with the Giants, you can say, okay, you have Cam Scatabo, who seems like he could be a hardball guy in terms of a physical running back, hard nosed, all of that. They have Malik Neighbors, who, albeit will be coming back from a knee injury, but one of the more talented young wide receivers in the NFL. And they have some pieces on the defensive side of the ball. Now, They lost a lot of games. The Giants stink. They're gonna have a you know good draft pick, all that. But of all those teams, that's why Miami never really felt, other than the Stephen Ross connection and the weather, never really felt appealing because you look at their cap situation and their lack of a quarterback and the fact that where are they going to pick to be able to get a quarterback, and some of these other jobs where there's just point blank wasn't a quarterback, and one of the big reasons why a job comes open. I think the Giants made a lot of sense. They're a blue blood organization in terms of legacy, even though they have not been very good at all for quite a long
Well,
time
they
now.
only have to crawl to be better than the Redskins, or excuse me, the Commanders and the Cowboys at this point, right? Like it's not a rock'em sock'em division at this moment, and the Eagles are perceived to be whatever they are. They just fired their offense coordinator; they'll
Sure.
get better. But boy, it's just so many coaching jobs, right?
Yeah, it's
And this is
crazy.
the
Nine.
first. This is the first one that's going to like start pushing things over as to where the Steelers are going and the Ravens are going and like all these other things because John was the golden child at least for a week and he called his shot, right?
Yeah.
Like literally, you had more to say, so keep going because I'm going to take us down a whole different lane with Harbaugh.
Well, I mean, I think you just look at the Giants. I mean, go back to 2016 when I guess Ben McAdoo was their head coach at that point in time. They were 11-5. That's when Odell Beckham was still, legitimately not a reputation or just a name like he was in Baltimore and some of his later stops in his career. But 2016, they were 11-5 since 2016. So we're talking a decade. Their records: 3-13, 5-11, 4-12, 6-10, 4-13, 9-7. They did that under Dable and they made the playoffs, lost in the divisional round. 6-11, 3-14, 4-13. I mean, the bar for him
Who
to
was their
have
quarterback when they made the playoffs with Dable?
that would have been Daniel Jones.
Okay, I'm just trying to think like and listen, Dable was a guy that the Ravens might have hired had they fired Harbaugh in that moment a couple
Yeah,
of five, at
highly
any
thought
point,
of.
at any point.
Did great work in Buffalo. I mean, highly thought of, and I mean that was until this past year in Indianapolis. Obviously before the Achilles injury, Daniel Jones. I mean that was kind of the best he looked at any point. He had a solid year. I think he had a 92.5 QB rating. Didn't have a ton of touchdowns. Didn't have a ton of touchdown passes, but was efficient and gave them a chance to win. So. But point is, looking back at the Giants over the last 10 years, I mean, they've been way closer to being the Cleveland Browns than what you would have perceived the Giants to be under Tom Coughlin or certainly under Parcells or any other period of time where they've had a little more success. So
But
the
they also
bar,
haven't brought in a retread or a Super Bowl champion, or they didn't bring Sean Payton back. They didn't, they
yeah,
didn't. They went with guys who failed, and let's be honest, dude, I got so many directions I can take this because I've been, fighting with people on the internet, whatever. But as time goes on, and I remember Kevin Burns saying this to me at the turn of the century when Phil Savage left, and it was like, dude, is Phil Savage the genius here? Is Phil Savage the one you're
yeah,
going to keep and have here and have Ozzy be, because Ozzy was always perceived as being old, and you pointed out already, Ozzy's not nearly as old as he
no,
walks. You know what I mean? Like because of the football thing and the
sure.
knees and like all of that. Um, but Kevin Burns said to me, this is Art's thoughts, by the way. Art was still there. Was no Steve's money was in, but Steve wasn't. It wasn't Steve's decision at all. It was Art and David, um, and probably Brian once Brian got here because Brian didn't like Phil. You know what I mean? Like just flat out. Because Phil drafted Chris Redman and pissed Brian off. Like you know what I mean? Like literally. Um, and we talk about the divide between scouting and coaching and how that can be
It
not
can
so
be
good.
very real. Yeah,
That could be very, very real. And who's got control and who doesn't. And I think
sure.
no better example of that than Steve Bisciotti, who was on stage shouting out Ozzie Newsome twice during the presser, while Eric DeCosta looked like he wanted to crawl under the table for most of the time I saw him. I mean, the camera wasn't always on him, but he looked really uncomfortable to me because he's next. And Ozzie, I mean, to me, Ozzie, like, I don't want to say he made John, but he made Brian, he made John, he made Ted, he drafted Ray Lewis. I mean, Ozzy to me, Lamar. I mean, still,
Sure.
Ozzy's the genius in the building until proven otherwise. And he's still there. Thank God for Steve, and he still loves football. And he and Eric are blood brothers, and
Still
like
there every day.
they still have that going on, and that's the most attractive thing they have for any veteran person, especially who knows better, who's been in some bad places like Jim Schwartz or like Vance Joseph or like all these retread guys that we talk about have been places. I heard Nagy talked about taking too much control. I mean, they've all learned lessons through this. I really wonder what John's lesson is in all of this in regard to Ozzy's wisdom and Eric's wisdom and what he learned down the hallway and what his brother knows and what his father knows and what he now knows that he didn't know before about the power. But he's going to have a much easier job in a lot of ways there for the near short future. Make more money, less stress. If he goes 6-11 next year, he just does. And it's going to be okay as long as things are getting better and he's having a good time and his wife's having a good time, and because he's got all the money in the world. And much like all of these cats, I know how much money you have, you know how much money I have. We don't have much, but these are miserable people when they come forth, right? Like, especially right now with how much work and this and that, it all feels so burdensome. And like, but Harbaugh's going to a place now where like Mr. Harbaugh, he's going to wear a suit. He's going to walk in. Every Giants fan's going to love him. They're going to be chanting his name when they're making draft picks in 8 weeks, as opposed to what the hell this was when he left, right? Same thing for Andy Reid going out to the friendly heart of the Midwest, and he'll get that advice. He's gotten all of that wisdom, but the football's got to work. And
Yeah.
I'm not, and like you and I are going to get like real brass tacks on whether it's going to work and what we really think of John. Like, really think of John at 63, where he is. Because I tell you what, dude, I didn't like Bashadi's energy a bit. I mean, like in the aftermath of the guy I met 20 years ago and what that guy was selling and what that guy brought in and what that guy did interviewing Harbaugh and wanted for like that guy's gone. He's a different cat. Harbaugh's a different, you're a different cat. We're all different cats. But Harbaugh's going into this situation with a whole different perspective, pocketbook, power structure, halo, crown for now. Turns into thorns quickly. Ask Brian Dable, ask all those guys, but especially in New York. And that's the part that chews me up a little bit with him is sort of like, if anybody asked me about John Harbaugh, the first thing I'd say is he's paranoid, which leads to dishonesty, and I don't trust him. But all that being said, the paranoia, the New York, the largeness of it, I don't know when it gets heavy, when this kid can't play, or it gets light if he can. And I don't know if John's a quarterback whisperer or not. And the kid runs into linebackers, as you pointed out, which is a really stupid, bad habit, bad habit.
Yeah.
And a tough guy and all that. And Mormon, I've done. I don't know much about Jackson Dart, but like did a little more looking him up.
He's talented. I mean, like he's talented, but one, he's not finished developing. So I think it's going to be, I mean, as has always been the case for John Harbaugh over 18 years, it's going to be incredibly important
Not nearly as good a
who
prospect
he
as
hires.
Flacco or like like the other guys he's had to me.
Well, I mean, sure, yeah. I'm not, he wasn't the number one overall
He
pick
also
or anything like
inherited,
that.
Ed Reed and Ray Lewis
Sure.
and all these remnants of a 13-3 team that Brian left behind. And Steve just didn't like Brian. And the more I see of Steve getting loose with y'all, no wonder that. I mean, I'd even say to Brian all these years later, I'm like, dude, like, no, the guy that came up to me charging at 2 a.m, telling me to stay away from Jim Harbaugh, not John, Jim and Jack and Jackie. And like that guy 17 years later with $5 billion more than that night, like Harbaugh it has improved his life dramatically, as Steve promised earlier this week. It's one thing he certainly said that was true because he loved John Harbaugh. John could have left here whenever he wanted. It said in the middle of the night when Steve called him, Steve, I'm going to go work for somebody else. I've got, you know what I mean? Like John never did that. John never, and I'll tell you this, man, John always had the team ready to play, but John always had the most talent. And that's like, I started comparing him to Tomlin in the records, and I'm like, John Harbaugh and almost every year had more talent than Mike Tomlin, even because Roethlisberger was considered old at the time. Maybe not in 08, 09, 10, but once the Heinz Wards got away and Tomlin had to manage the animal farm up there with Antonio Brown and a bunch of knuckleheads and Roethlisberger being old and broken down and then really having nothing since Roethlisberger left and still beating his ass twice on the way out the door. I don't know, dude. To me, Tomlin's a better ball coach in a lot of ways, and that would speak to the way he relates to players and media and humans, and not being a fraud and a phony in having five faces. But the Harbaugh thing for me is I don't know where he's getting his talent up there, and I don't know how long the media thing will last. But I know the paranoia will go with him, and John's going to have a nice ride there for a little while without having to win, and that's you know it's amazing. He just improved his life a whole lot. He won't look nearly as tired as maybe he looked the last time you saw him in Pittsburgh.
Well, at first, but I agree. There will be a honeymoon. Uh, we'll see about Jackson Dart. We'll see about some of their other young, talented players. I mean, and the Giants have more talent than some of the other teams that fit into their record, kind of category as far as being amongst the very worst in the NFL. Like, for example, I'd prefer the Giants roster to the Raiders, for example. But
Dude,
that
the
said,
Titans took a one overall and he didn't want him. He said, "Nah, I'll take this
well,
guy instead." Right?
and I don't know how much of it was that and how much of it was the organization
Oh, the
and
owner's
and
nuts.
and
Right?
what's around them, right?
Yeah,
So I
we
mean,
can
you're
visit
working for the
Nashville,
mayor.
Ingrid. Let's go live in New York.
It's not
Yeah.
Wellington Mara, but it's still the Mara family, right? So he must like Jackson Dart a lot. He must feel a certain way about Joe Shane, their GM, who has done some good things and some things that have not been perceived so well, right? So there's always that. There's going to be a honeymoon there in the
Well,
sense that
Harbaugh will survive him. Now that he's in,
yeah,
if
oh
he
yeah,
doesn't like him, let's get him out of here, right?
yeah,
And it won't
no
take
question,
long for Harbaugh at $100 million to extract whatever
no
he
question.
wants, including media
But
members apparently too. We'll see how that
assuming,
goes in New York when he says, "I don't want that guy in my, I don't want that guy in my press conference." I mean, it's just, hey man, as God is my witness.
okay, I thought you were going to finish.
No, I mean,
Yeah,
just yeah, like I'm just thinking about the bigness of the job up there when
I think,
he's throwing red flags that don't work
yeah,
and all of the things that never got better here, right? Even though Steve coached him up, led him up, even though he had Eric around him, John was always the biggest piece in the room. And it was John. Come on, dude. It was John's building. Like literally by the end, John ran everybody ragged, including me and you and Jameson and Jeff Strebeck and everybody else that was loved in the media. And I think he ran Lamar ragged. I think he ran players ragged to some degree. It was all worn out. And who came to his defense here? Did anybody come running out saying, "Don't fire him"? Like nobody. And he's going to walk in there and he's got a really good situation. That's all but the power thing and the paranoia thing, if anybody from New York asked me, I'd say that's who he is and what it's going to become. Um, and I don't know how that works. I mean, you know what I mean? We'll
yeah.
find out. I mean,
Well,
I know
I
how
think
it worked here. It worked long enough for him to keep his job because he figured Lamar out early on and then couldn't figure it out anymore. And I think that's a huge part of this is him saying, not him saying like he quit the job, but he got himself fired. You know what I mean? Like to some degree. And the Lamar thing sits in the middle of it for me because I know more, and so do you. And like the Lamar thing and the Jackson Dart thing, I find it fascinating that of all the places he could land, including on his ass at home, making $20 million to stay home like his boss told him to, and I know you got some points on that as well. He decided to jump in here, get the money because he really thinks this kid's bringing a parade to Broadway in the next 3 or 4 years, or he would not have taken that. I agree with that. I also think he's not going to get late night calls from a crazed owner. What we saw on the podium here, the absentee. I mean, he's going to have full control in whatever way he envisions it because I don't think it was ever perfect here for him, right? It wasn't perfect for him here.
I mean, I think he had it pretty darn good here. I mean,
Okay.
No job's perfect. No organization's going to be perfect, but I mean, he's here 18 years. He 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 had two franchise quarterbacks. I mean, how many head coaches have that kind of a setup? I mean, Mike Tomlin, who was in Pittsburgh 19 years, still only had one franchise quarterback, right? And that was part of why they've fallen off in the last 10 years in terms of at least what their ceiling was, regardless of their ability to continue to beat the Ravens, which is something John has to own. But I think from a media standpoint, I think he'll do fine early on. I think back to the week of Super Bowl 47 and how well John equipped himself and handled himself under those lights. I mean, we all remember John against Jim, Jim sitting there in his khakis and his sweatshirt and kind of looking like the old high school jock that you remember, that you see 15 years later and you say, man, that guy hasn't changed at all. And I'm not saying that, just how Jim appeared, right? Not his coaching acumen or anything like that. Whereas John's in, you know, fancy, expensive suits, looked very much the CEO of the organization as far as handling the press conferences and things of that nature. And John was perceived very favorably. I mean, at that point in time, he I wouldn't say he was an unknown. I mean, the Ravens had been to a couple AFC championships prior to that year in his first 5 seasons, but he wasn't a household name that the household name that he's become, over the last nearly 2 decades now. So I think he'll handle that part of it fine at first. I do think expectations with the Giants, despite it being New York, I don't think anyone's expecting him to lead them to a 12-5 division winning kind of finish in 2026. I think as long as they make progress, if they win 7, 8, 9 games, which I don't think is unreasonable if some of their guys come back from injury. I mean, I mentioned Scatabo, I mentioned Malik Neighbors are coming back from significant injuries. So that's a factor. And, as you and I are talking in real time, I mean, the news has already broke that Todd Monken, the plan is for him to join Harbaugh in New York. So it's going to be interesting to see how both of them do in a post Lamar Jackson way from
Well,
their
that was my
perspective.
question for you, and I'll just throw this to you because
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I have anything relevant to add to it, but to you, and you've been in a room with him more than I have lately for sure, but I've been in a room with him enough. I've been in private rooms with a lot more than you've been. I've had a lot more time just me and John hanging out alone talking about ball and life and
Hmm.
cancer and all that than you have because you get press conference time. You don't sit down with John. Um, when he comes in, and I don't mean for some pie in the sky owner that would look at him as I can put him on the mantle and he fits the suit and he's Johnny Bravo and he comes with a ring. He brings credibility. He brings not the bullshit he brings. I'm talking about what he really brings. What are his strengths as you see it? Like when he comes in, you just mentioned the one, which is why I stopped you, which is I'm going to have great coordinators. I'm going to get out of their way. I'm going to let my bakers bake and my chefs chef, and I'm just going to be coming into the kitchen and tasting the food. Like literally, that's kind of sort of what he's been here for 18 years. He never developed an offense or a scheme that had anything to do with Joe Flacco or the running game or any of that. He never developed a defensive scheme. It was always Rex's way or it was Wink's way, or it was whatever way was the way that was, the Michigan way, pretty much. It was the way. The Schembechler way
Yeah.
is kind of sort of the thing he was always trying to work from, which is his dad's way, really, of playing defense. It's the Harbaugh way, right? But I don't know that he spawned anybody that's going to the Hall of Fame other than the kid in Seattle that might be the guy here who took the week off, and we'll see how he does on Saturday night. Um, but I just from Harbaugh, speak to that 63, hadn't won this lately, hadn't won that lately, hadn't picked play, like had some failed coordinators, weird with the red flag, has had players, enough players say that they burn up with him or, mutiny and like all of that other stuff. Give me the Harbaugh resume as you see it when somebody from New York calls you and says, tell me about John Harbaugh and his strengths as a coach and a leader.
Well, I mean, he's a CEO. We know that. I mean, to your point, he wasn't an expert on either side of the ball, but I think that also can be a plus depending on the situation. I think John, as a special teams coordinator, one of his earliest strengths, and I think he continued on with that, is that you can kind of see the whole picture a little bit more rather than getting lost in the weeds of being so focused on your area of expertise, right? I mean, as I've said to you, I mean, for as much talk as we've had about, oh, well, you need to hire a brilliant offensive mind to pair with Lamar, and yeah, that would be my preference. But that also comes with an understanding that that's not the only part of the job, right? There's still the other 52 players. There's still the defense. There's the special teams. So I think John's always been really good from a big picture standpoint in that way. I would say this, and it's why I kind of rejected the notion that he, quote, lost the locker room. I mean, that's such a broad term anyway. I mean, look at what they did against Green Bay in week 17. Lamar was out. They knew that they were not in a good position at that point because you weren't expecting the Steelers to go into Cleveland and lose to the Browns the following day. It would have been very easy. That's why I kind of reject the notion that he lost the locker room. Was there fatigue? Was there frustration? Everyone was frustrated.
To me, losing the locker room happens when he's out of the locker room, and media may hear this or may not. And Lord knows I spent half my life in locker rooms before Chad Steele threw me out, and more than half my life in baseball locker rooms before Greg Bader threw me out 20 years ago. Grumbling is real. And when it gets to the media, when a guy would pull me up and say things are messed up in here, and that happened plenty in my life.
Sure.
I could write a book. I could write 50 instances where an athlete pulled me up or a coach pulled me up and said, what Preston's writing in a paper ain't right. What's on the news isn't right. Like, let me straighten this out for you. And then I either trust that guy or I don't. And with Brian Billick, who never lied to me, and Marvin Lewis, who never lied to me, and Mike Nolan, who never lied to me, and Rex Ryan, who never lied to me, and Mike Pettin, who never, Matt Cavanaugh, who never lied to me. So, I go through all of that, and I would just say for John and relationships and where it is in coaching, the next thing he does, I hope he gets a softer thing there, because the rumbling, when you say lose the locker room is when the guys are in the locker saying, he's effed up, the coordinator's effed up, that was a dumb decision, what the hell is he doing? Usually, now that I've been thrown out, I'm sitting here watching it on TV, and I'm like, what the hell is he doing? Or I go to Twitter, and they're like, what the hell is he doing? Or you're in the press box, and whoever's next to you up there says, what's that? Oh, God, John, you challenge. What'd you do? Is there who talks to John? Why has he got his sock out in the red? Like, all the years we've had those, and some things never got better. Some things did get better. Lamar, great quarterbacks and great defensive players making big plays. She makes everybody, Ed Reed made Brian Billick look smarter even when Brian's saying get down, right? So I'll give you all of that, but the notion that he's going to just take over the locker room there and everybody's going to buy in, he's going to get that there where you didn't have this year. And right. Losing the locker room is the things guys say to their wives when they get home about their coach. And like the feeling to me this year was, it wasn't big trusts, right? I mean, you've been around when there's all that energy and they swept Marshall Yonda, the old guys into, like, 1-5 begat that this year, I would say. Sure. Lamar not being on the field and all the injuries. But I do think that Isaiah Likely yelling at people on the way out how screwed up the coaches are, whether Isaiah Likely screwed up or not, and he dropped the ball too. But that finger pointing part of it, very un-Harbaugh. He didn't have a lot of that going on here, because when you're winning, you don't get a lot of that. But it didn't get tamped down this year. That's all. I mean, and I think as he's gotten older and more out of touch and more rich and more away from even the quarterback and more away from all of it, I think he lost his lane a little bit this year from where I could see it. On the outside, you're on the inside. And I think losing the locker room just means guys just don't believe anymore. And winning in Green Bay, and I'll give you all of that, but there was just a lot of grumbling this year. And
of course there was. I don't think anything you're saying is like rocket science. I mean, I think everyone was frustrated. Players are pissed. Coaches are pissed. They're pissed at each other, right? I mean, whether it's like over the top, I'm not saying guys are getting in fist fights, but
But he hasn't
yeah,
had to
they
put that
lost.
kind of fire out over 18 years.
But I guess
And he
I
had
guess
guys in the locker room that could put it out for him, is my point, right?
I mean, I suppose. I mean, they just they didn't play well. I the semantics. I just think losing the locker room is a very broad term. And my thought over the years when someone loses the locker room is that guys have completely mailed it in, and they didn't mail it in against Green Bay.
Fair enough.
You
They
know,
didn't nail it against
and I
Pittsburgh. They should have won.
but my point is with that, to me, a mailed in like when you've completely lost your locker room, they go to Green Bay and Lamar's hurt and they lose by 3 touchdowns and it's listless and you see definitively that it's over. Regardless, semantics, right? At the end of the day,
It's obvious those guys practiced hard and went onto the field,
sure.
and that's
obvious. But it's obviously, or it was obvious there was a lot of frustration. There's no question about that. I'm not sitting here trying to defend John that like he did a great job in 2025. No one did a great job in 2025.
But that would be my point of where he is when he walks into a new gig as a 63-year-old coach who sort of is moving in a way that a lot of 63-year-old coaches, like, is he going to find that second blood there in that way that he walked into my radio station in 2008? Is he ready to hit New York and have the energy that Ben Johnson had in Chicago? That's all I'm throwing out.
He's going to bring a legitimacy, right? I mean, he has a resume. He's a Super Bowl winning coach, regardless of what that's looked like over the last 6 or 7 years in terms of great regular seasons and underachievement with a 2-time MVP quarterback in January and the blown leads, which Bisciotti talked about. He will bring in a legitimacy. He will have an energy to him that will play in a different market better than it has, the idea of attacking the day with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind, even though people are familiar with that because they've heard John and Jim say that at
There's
various
one thing
places.
about him whipping that out for a fresh audience. It might be fun for him, right?
Sure. That I think he's going to feel rejuvenated. Oh,
dude, he's going to walk out. All the New York media's there, going to be ready to crown him. And yeah. But ESPN's going to be there.
To go back to answer your point, I alluded to this with what happened with the Packers. He's going to raise the floor there. If there's one thing you can say about John Harbaugh, and that is still true, even in the latter years where they weren't reaching their full potential necessarily. Not necessarily, they weren't, because when you're the number 1 seed 2 different times and you only net 1 AFC title game out of that, let alone not being able to get to the Super Bowl, he's still a very high floor kind of coach. I think back to 2021 when Lamar got hurt. Yes, they lost those games down the stretch, but you go and look at how they played in those games. I mean, they lost, how many of those were by 1 score? Tyler Huntley, first time you have a guy that's a couple years, a year removed from being an undrafted free agent. He's suddenly your starting quarterback and he's playing and you're still competing. They lost. I'm not going to, they lost 6 in a row or whatever it was. At the same time, it wasn't 6 in a row in the sense of like you're losing by 3 or 4 touchdowns. You go back to some other years where injuries piled up, they still competed. So I still think he brings a high floor. I think the Giants are going to be better, but the question is going to be, how good are they going to be? Because the skeptic, and I've seen a couple clips of various, national radio shows and talking heads. And while there's so much over the moon, stars in your eyes kind of talk about John Harbaugh killing it at his next stop, there's also a lot of people that are pointing out that like this isn't Jimmy Johnson going to the Dolphins. This isn't Parcells, right? Where you're talking about guys who won multiple Super Bowls. And in the case of John, I mean, that Super Bowl's old at this point. That ring is got dust on it, right? That trophy has dust on it. It's tarnished at this point in time because it's been 13 years. And the thought, the biggest argument against John is going to be, well, if you couldn't win with the 2-time MVP at quarterback, what are you going to be able to do with Jackson Dart, right? So I think there's that part of it. So I think he's going to raise the floor there, and I think it'll go well, at least for a time. I don't think it certainly helps that over the last decade, the Giants have been absolutely woeful. But before we wrap this, because I don't have too much else to say about John, I mean, we're going to find out, right? We're going to see how they draft. We're going to see how he works with Joe Shane and see what else they can do to improve that roster. They need to draft well, all those things. The same things we're going to be talking about with the Ravens in terms of what they need to do to get better, to bounce back from 8 and 9. And in addition to hiring a good coach and a good coordinator on either side of the ball. But one thing that you and I didn't have a chance to talk much of, we may have mentioned it in passing, but certainly didn't give it much more than a mention, is I thought one of the more interesting elements of Steve Bisciotti's press conference earlier in the week was how adamant he sounded about wishing that John was taking a year off, to the point where he flat out said, look, John taking a job elsewhere, that's going to offset the money. Like, I mean, Steve's going to end up not paying John anything. I mean, the Giants, presumably, I mean, the early reporting that's out there, we don't have official figures. He's going to be making more with the Giants than he was going to make over the next 3 years with the Ravens. So Steve's going to get out of that, scot free.
If it's not a 5-year, $100 million deal,
I mean, it feels like it's going to be somewhere in that very close. In that neighborhood.
Brian Harlan didn't do a good enough job.
I mean, maybe he doesn't eclipse Andy Reid. I think Andy's at 20 million per year. Maybe it's just a smidge below that, but it's going to be very close, if not. But I thought it was interesting to hear Steve just say, he's 63. Live life a little bit. He mentioned how his daughter Allison's in law school now, so he's an empty nester with Ingrid, and the idea of, go take a vacation in Europe for a month and a half. Go enjoy life for a little while. And I think there's another element to that in addition to that. And look, regardless of whether it was time for him or not, or what you think of any head coach, good or bad, those guys that they earn their money from the standpoint of it's a really hard, stressful life, especially in season, as far as, the hours these guys put in. I will always have respect for coaches in that way. And yes, it's results driven. If you don't win, you're going to get fired. I mean, that's the job. They understand that. I heard Mike McDonald, in fact, it was the Sirius XM NFL network radio was doing an interview with him, and he was asked about John. He was asked about Tomlin because, of course, he, old AFC North guy, coached with John, coached against Tomlin, and he flat out just said, he's like, look, that's going to be my fate one day. And I just thought that was interesting to hear that from someone who right now is perceived to be the top, right there with, amongst guys that haven't won Super Bowls yet. But he's right there as far as, the hot commodity as far as how he's perceived. I mean, his team's the number one seed coming off the bye, all that. But to hear Mike McDonald say, like, one, he has all the respect in the world for Harbaugh and Tomlin, but also to just very matter of factly say, yeah, that's going to be me one day. These guys know that's the job. I mean, for every coach who wins and rides off, Tomlin, to his credit, he was able to go out on his own terms, kind of, sort of, right? I think it was very much the buildup of disenchantment in Pittsburgh and feeling underappreciated and everything that's gone on there in recent years, and fans being frustrated there, just like in Baltimore. But to hear Mike McDonald say that just, again, kind of made me look at what Steve said and think, you do wonder if John would have been better served taking a year off, relax, decompress, do some media, stay well connected to the game in that way. And also just some reflection. Part of the frustration of what's happened with the Ravens in recent years is how confounding it's been at times, right? The idea that, and look, Harbaugh's got to own his part of it, but no one's naive enough to, I would hope no one's naive enough to think that the Ravens' shortcomings are 100% John Harbaugh's fault. I will wholeheartedly reject that. He didn't coach Mark Andrews to fumble the ball or drop the ball. He didn't coach Zay Flowers to fumble the ball going across the goal line. He wasn't coaching Lamar Jackson to play at less than an MVP level in January after playing like the best quarterback in the universe through September, or from September through December, right? There's more to that. And I'm not saying John's gets off scot-free. Of course not. He lost his job. But I do think there was something to the idea of reflecting and learning about yourself a little bit, stepping back, doing self-scouting, which coaches always talk about during the bye week every year. And okay, taking a year off, would that have meant that he's the hottest commodity on the market next year, that 7 teams are after him? Maybe not. But I guarantee at least 2 or 3 would have been after him. And that's all you need, right? You need 2 teams to create a market and a bidding war for your services. So I do wonder, and it'll be fascinating to see because it's very apparent, barring something strange, after you and I wrap this up, that looks like Mike Tomlin's taken a year off. It very much feels that way. I mean, there's been reporting that teams have reached out and been told that no, he's taken 2026 off. Now, whether that means he comes back in 2027 or this turns into Bill Cowher, where we talked about Cowher coming back to coaching for what, about a decade? And meanwhile, he's just collecting checks from CBS and enjoying life. And God bless him. That's great. I mean, he's good at what he does, has been for a long time, and way less stress. He'd be the first to tell you. So I do find it interesting that Steve was so adamant and flat out saying, like, look, I'm perfectly content and happy and grateful for all you've done, to the point where I'd be completely fine with giving you a $17 million vacation for 2026, and then you jump into the pool next year. I mean, I think he even told John that, the way it sounded. So I do wonder if
I
for
never
him,
thought John would take the year off. Not
I
with
did
this many
not.
jobs, not with attractive jobs either. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean,
There's
I
always an attractive job or
sure.
two, but the Baltimore Pittsburgh thing,
Well,
you know,
but the
that
Baltimore,
unto itself is kind of a weird makes it
yeah,
a
it
weird
is, but
cycle.
obviously Baltimore's not an option for
Well, the
him.
cycle next year
But
would be
yeah,
Kansas City, right?
possibly.
You know, there
I
there
mean,
are a
you never
couple
know.
places where, well,
I mean, let's be clear. I mean, this is not that I in any way would push back on the merit of Harbaugh or even Tomlin for that matter being let go. If the Steelers had actually let Tomlin go rather than him walking away. But I mean, we've talked about the standard of coaching. I mean, some of these coaches that walk into a lousy situation and as expected, they're lousy and then they're gone, right? I mean, one of the things that Bisciotti talked about. You and I talked about that in a previous segment, talking about how open he sounded to the idea. Not that that's what they're going to do ultimately, but open to the idea of looking at someone like a Robert Saleh, for example, and saying, man, that guy was very much a hot commodity. He goes to the Jets. He never has a quarterback situation that, I mean, maybe if Aaron Rodgers never tears his Achilles, his first game with the Jets, maybe that year goes differently, but they never got the quarterback right. And it's the Jets. What did you really expect? So does that suddenly mean that Robert Saleh, who, by the way, I think has done a really good job. I mean, you look at, much as we've talked about Matabike and the
Joe
impact of,
Douglas lost his job because it didn't work there either, and Joe Douglas is the one that hired Robert Saleh, right? So
sure, but, I was finishing a point on Saleh. Look at the injuries the 49ers defense has had. And that's not a great defense, let me be clear, but they're playing at they're giving their team a chance to win with the way they're playing, right? Whereas like the Ravens lost Matabike and the pass rush just stunk this year. I mean, it's just there's no other way to put it. But the point is, with someone like a Robert Saleh or Kevin Stefanski or whoever you want to go through, right? The idea that you evaluate the situation they were in as well and say, all right, the record wasn't very good, but like, what'd you expect it to be? Right. I mean, I'd say this much in defense of Pete Carroll, who I assume is never going to coach again, at least not as a head coach, but he went into the Raiders and all right, I'll admit, I thought Geno Smith would be better than he was this year, but did anyone at all think that the Raiders are going to be any good this year? In that division, especially? No. So the idea that and believe me, it went horribly. But the point is, you kind of look at some of these coaches, they're DOA. If the expectation is you need to win in year one, they're DOA. I mean, they have no chance. So I think the Ravens are, Bisciotti saying that at least acknowledge that, you know, some of these guys were considered to be geniuses 5 years ago. And they went into a situation that just didn't have the quarterback, didn't have the players, maybe didn't have the GM, and then they were gone in a couple years, and it wasn't really surprising. So I thought that was interesting. But with John, I think he could have been well served to take a year off. I'm with you. I'm not surprised that he didn't. I think that the jock, the competitor in him, the hardball in him, that their father has, that their entire family has. If you've ever, I mean, you can speak to that as well. I mean, the whole family's just wired that way, that he wasn't going to take a year off. But I do wonder, if everything that happened over these last 5 to 6 years, blown leads, January shortcomings, just not looking like the team in January that you were from September through December overall, this year being the exception, which is why he was unemployed in the sense that they just weren't good in the regular season either. But I do wonder if some self-scouting, some self-reflection, talking to some other coaches, getting some input, if that would have served him well to jump into it next year. But hey, teams are beating down your door and telling you how much they want you, and they're giving you all the money and whatever control, whatever perks. I mean, all of that. Who am I to sit here and say, no, don't do that? I just think it was interesting to hear Steve's perspective on that. And in that way, I think that speaks to the relationship that they did have in terms of, Steve speaking as complimentary as he was about John, even after firing him a week earlier, and just saying he did sound like an older brother in that way, kind of like, man, I kind of wish he'd just take it easy for a little while.
Well, he
Like,
also said, I don't feel like I hurt John, and he didn't hurt John at all. John's got a job with a
yeah,
quarterback he feels like he's going to get along with a
sure,
general, with the whole thing,
we'll
with
see.
the next thing, and like all of that. And this will be his chance to go get himself to Canton. Luke can be found at Baltimore Luke. If there's any breaking news that's not John Harbaugh getting the Giants job, you'll get it first on the WNST Tech Service, all brought to you by Cole Roofing and Gordian Energy. Meanwhile, we got football games going on. We have a Super Bowl to win. We have a head coach to hire. And enough about the Giants in New York. I'm on to Owings Mills. We're back for more Baltimore Positive. Stay with us.